I'm Sarah, and I'm 23 years old. Sometimes I look around my apartment and wonder how a marriage can feel so full of love, and yet so close to falling apart at the same time. If you met my husband and me today, you'd probably think we were one of those couples who had everything figured out. We laugh together, we pray together, we finish each other's sentences. Even after 3 years of marriage, he still makes me tea when I'm stressed. He still remembers the tiny things I mention once and then forget about. He still texts me during the day just to ask if I've eaten. That's what makes all of this hurt so much. Because the man who loves me more than anyone else in the world is also the man who might leave me because of something that happened before he ever met me. And the worst part? He admits he doesn't even know why. To explain how we got here, I need to go back 4 years. Back before marriage. Back before I was Muslim. Back before I knew how much one person's thoughts could destroy both their own happiness and yours. I grew up in Europe in a pretty normal family. We weren't religious. Faith wasn't something we talked about at home. We celebrated holidays because everyone celebrated them, not because anyone believed deeply in them. As a teenager, I was constantly searching for something. I didn't realize it at the time, but there was always this feeling inside me that something was missing. I'd lie awake at night staring at my ceiling and wondering why life felt so temporary. Why people spent their whole lives chasing money, relationships, attention, careers, and then one day they died. That couldn't be all there was. I remember watching documentaries about different religions, reading random articles online, listening to debates, trying to understand why billions of people believed in God when nobody around me seemed to care. Islam fascinated me. Not because of a man, not because of social media, not because it was trendy. Actually, it was the opposite. Everything I heard about Islam in the media was negative. Yet whenever I looked deeper, I found something completely different. Discipline, purpose, structure, accountability. I wasn't practicing anything at that point. I wasn't even close to becoming Muslim. But Islam was sitting quietly in the back of my mind. Then I met him. I was 19. He was 20. And honestly, neither of us were examples of good Muslims. Not even close. He was Arab by ethnicity and Muslim by name. But religion wasn't really part of his life. His family wasn't religious. They didn't pray regularly. Islam existed more as a cultural identity than a way of life. The funny thing is that I probably knew more about Islam than he did when we first met. We met through mutual friends. At first, he was just a guy I occasionally talked to. Then we started messaging. Then messaging became phone calls. Phone calls became hours-long conversations. And before I knew it, he had become the person I wanted to tell everything to. He was funny, patient, kind. The type of person who made everyone around him feel comfortable. I still remember sitting in my room smiling at my phone after talking to him. My mother would walk past my door and immediately know. "You're talking to him again, aren't you?" And I'd try to act casual. "No," she'd laugh. "You've been smiling for an hour." Looking back now, those memories feel innocent. At the time, we were just two young people falling in love. We weren't thinking about halal and haram. We weren't thinking about marriage. We weren't thinking about consequences. We were thinking about each other. The relationship lasted about a year, a beautiful year, but also a complicated one. Because something unexpected started happening. Islam stopped being a curiosity for me and became something much deeper. I began reading the Quran more seriously. I started listening to lectures. I started learning about the Prophet. And for the first time in my life, things started making sense. Questions I'd carried since childhood suddenly had answers. Life had purpose. Suffering had meaning. Death wasn't the end. The more I learned, the more convinced I became. At the same time, my boyfriend was going through his own transformation. He started learning about Islam too. Maybe because of me. Maybe because Allah guided him at the same time. Maybe both. But little by little, he changed. I changed. And eventually we found ourselves facing a problem. A huge one. We loved each other, but we knew what we were doing wasn't right. I remember one particular night. We were sitting in his car after dinner. The atmosphere felt different. Heavy. Like both of us knew something neither wanted to say. He stared out the windshield. I stared at my hands. Finally, he spoke. "I don't think we can keep doing this." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "This relationship." For a second, I thought he was breaking up with me because he didn't love me anymore. I could literally feel panic rising in my chest. But then he continued, "I love you." The words made everything hurt even more. "I love you too. That's the problem." I remember tears filling my eyes almost instantly. He looked devastated too. Neither of us wanted the conversation we were having, but both of us knew it had to happen. "We keep learning about Islam," he said quietly, "and every lecture says the same thing." I knew exactly what he meant. Neither of us said the word haram. We didn't need to. It was hanging in the air between us. I started crying. Not dramatic crying, the kind where tears just won't stop falling no matter how hard you try. He was crying too. We sat there for almost an hour talking, praying, trying to figure out what to do. At one point I remember saying something I'll never forget. What if we separate and then never find each other again? The thought terrified me. What if we did the right thing and lost everything? What if Allah took him out of my life forever? He looked at me and said something that changed my perspective completely. If Allah wants us together, nobody can stop it. At the time, those words felt impossible to trust, but they stayed with me. Eventually, we made the decision. We would separate completely. No dating, no meeting, no secret conversations, nothing, with the intention of marriage. The day we actually stopped talking felt like someone had died. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's honestly how it felt. I kept reaching for my phone throughout the day, wanting to message him, wanting to tell him something funny, wanting to ask how his day was. Then remembering I couldn't. The silence was unbearable. Every morning I woke up and checked my phone out of habit. Nothing. Every night I wanted to hear his voice. Nothing. Friends told me I was crazy. Some said I'd ruined the best relationship I'd ever have. Others said he would move on, that he'd find someone else, that I was naive. Maybe I was. But for the first time in my life, I genuinely believed I was sacrificing something for Allah. And the first hoped Allah wouldn't waste that sacrifice. Those 6 months felt longer than the entire year we had spent together. I focused on learning Islam, learning how to pray, learning Arabic words I could barely pronounce, learning what it meant to submit to Allah. The more I learned, the more my faith grew. But so did my fear, because every day that passed without him felt like another reminder that I might lose him forever. Then one evening, 6 months after we separated, my phone rang. I saw his name. My heart nearly stopped. I stared at the screen, frozen. Then I answered. The moment I heard his voice, it felt like no time had passed at all. After a few minutes of nervous conversation, he said something that made my entire body shake. I spoke to my family. I held my breath. And I want to marry you. I remember bursting into tears before he even finished speaking. Not graceful tears, not cute movie tears. Ugly, crying. The kind where you can barely breathe. Because in that moment, every fear I'd carried for 6 months suddenly disappeared. I wasn't losing him, I was getting him back. This time the right way. And I had absolutely no idea that years later, after building what felt like a beautiful marriage together, a completely different battle would begin. A battle neither of us saw coming, and one that would threaten everything we had sacrificed to build. The months leading up to our wedding were some of the happiest and most stressful months of my life. Everything felt surreal. One minute I was a 19-year-old girl crying because I thought I'd lost the man I loved forever. The next I was shopping for wedding clothes, speaking with his family, and preparing to become someone's wife. And not just anyone's wife, his. The man I had spent 6 months trying not to think about. The man I had made dua for every single day. The man I had trusted Allah with. I wish I could say everything was perfect. It wasn't. We came from completely different worlds. I was European. He was Arab. I was a revert, learning Islam one step at a time. He was born Muslim, but was also rebuilding his relationship with Islam from the ground up. Sometimes our cultures clashed. Sometimes our families viewed things differently. Sometimes misunderstandings happened because we interpreted situations through completely different lenses. But somehow we always found our way back to each other. That's one thing I loved about him. Even during disagreements, he never made me feel like his enemy. It always felt like us against the problem, not him against me. Our nikah day is still one of my favorite memories. I remember waking up before sunrise. My stomach was in knots. I barely slept the night before. I kept wondering if I was ready. Ready for marriage. Ready for responsibility. Ready for a completely new life. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, staring at myself. For a moment, I didn't recognize the girl looking back. 4 years earlier, I wasn't Muslim. Now I was preparing to marry a Muslim man. Life felt unreal. I remember making dua before leaving, asking Allah to bless our marriage, to protect us, to make us a source of goodness for each other, to never let us become strangers. If only I knew how important that last dua would become. The first year of marriage was beautiful. Genuinely beautiful. People always talk about the difficulties of marriage, but honestly, I loved it. I loved having someone to come home to. I loved sharing meals together. I loved grocery shopping together. Even boring things felt exciting. Sometimes we'd stay awake until 2 a.m. talking about everything and nothing. Our future children, our goals, our dreams. Where we'd live one day, the names we'd give our kids. We'd laugh until our stomachs hurt. We'd pray together. We'd learn together. We grew closer not just as husband and wife, but as Muslims too. There was something special about knowing we had both changed our lives for Allah around the same time. Neither of us felt superior to the other. We were both learning, both growing, both making mistakes. And because we had been transparent from the beginning, there weren't any major secrets between us. When we first got together years earlier, we'd had difficult conversations. Conversations most people avoid. We discussed our pasts, not details, never details, just the fact that there had been previous relationships before we met. Neither of us were perfect. Neither of us claimed to be. The conversation wasn't dramatic. In fact, it was surprisingly mature. I remember feeling relieved afterwards. Everything was out in the open. No lies, no surprises, no hidden skeletons, just honesty. And honestly, after that conversation, I barely thought about it again. It wasn't relevant anymore. We had both repented. We had both moved forward. We had both chosen each other. At least that's what I thought. The second year of marriage started normally. Nothing seemed different. Nothing seemed wrong. If someone had asked me then whether I thought we'd ever divorce, I would have laughed. Not because I believed divorce was impossible, but because we genuinely seemed happy. Then little things started changing. Small things. Almost invisible things, the kind of things you only recognize in hindsight. At first, he became quieter. Not all the time, just occasionally. Sometimes I'd catch him staring into space, lost in thought. When I'd ask what was wrong, he'd smile and say nothing. I'd believe him. Because everyone has bad days. Everyone gets stressed. Everyone has things on their mind. Then I started noticing something else. Sometimes he'd become distant for a few hours. Emotionally distant. Like he was physically present but mentally somewhere else. Again, I didn't think much of it. Marriage isn't constant happiness. People go through phases. At least that's what I told myself. Then one night everything changed. I remember the exact evening. We were sitting on our couch after dinner. The television was on, but neither of us were really watching it. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Eventually he muted the TV. My stomach immediately tightened. Something felt wrong. Really wrong. He looked nervous. The kind of nervous where someone keeps rubbing their hands together. I waited. Finally he spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." His voice sounded strange, uncertain. "What do you think about people's pasts?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. Then he asked a few more questions. Questions that immediately made my heart sink. Because suddenly I knew exactly where this conversation was going. Our pasts. The thing we hadn't discussed in years. The thing I thought was buried forever. I remember feeling confused. Why was this suddenly coming up now? After 2 years of marriage. Why now? The conversation lasted hours, and the more he talked, the more shocked I became. He admitted that, lately he'd been thinking about my past. Constantly. Obsessively. Thoughts would appear in his head out of nowhere. Then he'd replay them over and over, imagining things, creating scenarios, comparing himself to people who no longer existed in my life. People I hadn't thought about in years. People who meant absolutely nothing to me. But somehow they had become real inside his mind. Powerful, threatening, present. I sat there listening, completely stunned, because this wasn't jealousy about something happening now. This wasn't suspicion. This wasn't betrayal. This was about things that happened before I even met him. Things he already knew about, things he'd accepted, or at least I thought he'd accepted. At one point I remember asking quietly, "Did something happen?" He looked confused. "What do you mean? Did someone say something? Did you find something? Did I do something?" "No." "Then why now?" He just shook his head. I don't know. That answer terrified me. Because if there was a reason, maybe we could fix it. If there was a trigger, maybe we could remove it. But if he didn't know why, how were we supposed to solve it? Over the following weeks, things got worse. Much worse. The thoughts weren't going away. They were growing. Every few days, we'd end up having another conversation. The same conversation. Different wording. Same pain. I could see how much he hated it. That's what made everything so confusing. He wasn't angry, he wasn't cruel, he wasn't trying to punish me, he was suffering too. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the floor looking exhausted, like he was fighting a battle inside his own head. One evening he broke down crying. Seeing him cry scared me more than anything, because my husband almost never cried. He looked completely defeated. I hate these thoughts. I sat beside him. He covered his face with his hands. I hate them. I remember rubbing his back while tears ran down my own face. "Then why are you listening to them?" He looked up at me. And I'll never forget what he said. "Because they feel true." Those words haunted me. Because I realized this wasn't simply about logic anymore. This was emotional. Deeply emotional. The thoughts felt real to him, even when they weren't rational. And once emotions take over, facts often stop mattering. For months we went back and forth. Good days, bad days, hope, fear, progress, setbacks. Some nights we'd stay awake until sunrise talking. Trying to understand what was happening, trying to save our marriage, trying to save each other. I prayed more than I ever had before. Tahajjudu dua Quran. Anything, everything. I begged Allah to remove whatever was poisoning his thoughts, to bring peace back into our home, to bring peace back into his heart. Then things reached a point where divorce entered the conversation for the first time, and hearing that word come out of his mouth felt like someone had punched me in the chest, because suddenly the marriage I thought was secure no longer felt secure at all. For the first time since our wedding day, I was genuinely afraid of losing him, and what happened next would become the hardest period of our entire marriage. The first time divorce became a real possibility, I felt like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. Up until that moment, divorce had always been something that happened to other people, not us. We had sacrificed so much to be together. We had left a relationship for the sake of Allah. We had waited. We had done things the right way. We had built a marriage full of love, friendship, and mercy. So how could something that happened before we even got married suddenly destroy everything? It didn't make sense. And yet there I was, sitting across from my husband at our dining table, listening to him tell me he wasn't sure if he could continue living with these thoughts. I remember staring at him in complete disbelief. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to shake him and make him understand what he was saying. But mostly I just felt scared, terrified. Because I could see that he wasn't trying to hurt me. He genuinely believed he was trapped. That's what made it so difficult. If he had been cruel, I could have been angry. If he had cheated, I could have blamed him. If he had treated me badly, I could have hated him. But he was still the same loving husband. The same man who made me breakfast. The same man who checked if I'd arrived safely. The same man who tucked a blanket over me when I fell asleep on the sofa. The same man who loved me. Yet somehow he was also the man considering ending our marriage. The contradiction nearly drove me insane. One night I remember sitting alone in our bedroom after an argument. Not a shouting match. Neither of us were screaming. That almost would have been easier. Instead, it was one of those painful conversations where both people are crying and nobody knows how to fix anything. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at our wedding photo. The photo that had always made me smile. Now it made my chest hurt. I kept asking myself the same question, why? Why was this happening? What had changed? What was so different now compared to 2 years ago? I couldn't understand it, and honestly, neither could he. That was the frustrating part. Whenever I asked for a reason, he couldn't give one. Not a real one. Just feelings, just discomfort, just thoughts, just emotions. And emotions are difficult to argue with. A few weeks later, something surprising happened. My husband decided to speak with a sheikh. I was relieved. I remember thinking maybe this would finally help. Maybe hearing an outside perspective would break whatever cycle he was trapped in. Maybe someone with knowledge could explain things better than I could. When he came home afterwards, I immediately knew the conversation had affected him. He looked thoughtful, quiet, almost emotional. I asked how it went. He sat down and told me everything. The sheikh had listened carefully, asked questions, tried to understand the situation, and according to my husband, the sheikh said this issue was actually very common, especially among married couples. That surprised me. I had genuinely thought we were dealing with something unusual. But apparently many people struggled with retroactive jealousy and obsessive thoughts about their spouse's past. Then my husband told me the second thing the sheikh said, the thing that completely shattered my hope. The sheikh apparently said that unfortunately many marriages don't survive it. Many end in divorce. When I heard those words, I felt sick. Not because I believed divorce was inevitable, but because I knew my husband. And I knew he was focusing on that sentence. Not the possibility of healing, not the possibility of growth. Not the possibility of overcoming it, just the divorce part. Like his mind had grabbed onto it and refused to let go. Over the following months, things became exhausting, emotionally exhausting. We'd have good weeks where everything felt normal. Then suddenly something would trigger him. A random thought, a random memory, a random insecurity, and we'd find ourselves right back where we started. It felt like living with a storm cloud. Some days the sky was clear. Some days lightning appeared out of nowhere. The unpredictability became its own source of anxiety. I started becoming hyper-aware of his moods, watching his expressions, analyzing his tone, trying to figure out whether he was having another bad day. It was draining. I didn't even realize how much it was affecting me until one evening when I broke down in the kitchen. I was washing dishes, something completely ordinary, and suddenly I started crying, hard, uncontrollably. I slid down onto the floor and just sat there, crying into my hands, because I was exhausted. Exhausted from feeling like my marriage was constantly hanging by a thread. Exhausted from trying to prove my worth. Exhausted from being judged by something that neither defined me nor reflected who I was anymore. Most of all, I was exhausted from feeling powerless. No matter how much reassurance I gave him, it wasn't enough. No matter how much love I showed him, It wasn't enough. No matter how many years of loyalty I demonstrated, it wasn't enough. I couldn't change the past. Nobody can. And for the first time in my life, I felt trapped by something I could never undo. Eventually, after months of struggle, something shifted. Gradually. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly. The conversations became less frequent. The tension eased. The dark cloud started lifting. My husband threw himself into worship. Tahajjud every night. Du'a after every prayer. Constantly asking Allah to remove these thoughts from his heart. And honestly, I admired him for that, because I knew how hard he was fighting. I knew how desperately he wanted peace. Little by little, life began feeling normal again. The topic stopped coming up. Weeks passed. Then months. I started breathing easier, laughing more, sleeping better. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Maybe we had survived it. Maybe this nightmare was finally over. I remember one evening about a year later. We were walking together after dinner. The weather was perfect. The sky was painted orange by the setting sun. And I suddenly realized something. We hadn't talked about his issue in months. Months. It felt like a miracle. I looked at him and smiled. A genuine smile. The kind that comes from relief. For the first time in forever, I allowed myself to imagine our future again. Children. A house. Growing old together. Everything felt possible. I genuinely believed we had made it through the hardest chapter of our marriage. Looking back now, maybe that was the moment I let my guard down completely. Maybe that's why what happened next hurt so much, because I never saw it coming. Not after all that progress. Not after all those prayers. Not after all that healing. But one evening, almost exactly a year later, my husband walked into our living room with a look on his face that immediately made my stomach drop. I hadn't seen that look in a very long time, and the second I saw it, I knew. The thoughts were back. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was about to become worse than ever before. The moment I saw his face, I knew. You know how sometimes you can tell something is wrong before a single word is spoken? That's exactly what happened. He walked into the living room after work and sat down across from me. Normally he'd come over, kiss my forehead, ask about my day. That evening he looked distracted, heavy, like he was carrying something he didn't know how to put down. My heart immediately started racing. For a few minutes we made small talk. Completely pointless small talk. The kind people make when they're avoiding the real conversation. Then finally he looked at me and said, "They're back." I felt cold. Instantly, like all the warmth had left the room. I knew exactly what he meant. Neither of us needed clarification. Neither of us needed details. The thoughts, the obsession, the doubts, the fear, everything we thought we'd defeated, everything we'd spent over a year trying to overcome. Back. I remember staring at him in silence. Part of me couldn't believe it. Part of me didn't want to believe it. I felt like someone had told me a disease had returned after being declared cured. "What happened?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know." The same answer, the same terrifying answer. And suddenly it felt like we'd traveled backwards in time. Months of healing disappeared in a single conversation. The following weeks were brutal. Not because we were constantly arguing. Actually, it was worse than that. It felt like we were grieving a future that might never happen. One evening we sat at the dining table for nearly 4 hours. The food had gone cold. Neither of us touched it. We just talked, or at least tried to. I kept asking questions. Trying to understand, trying to find something logical, something tangible, anything. Finally, I asked him directly, "Why does this bother you if you also had a past?" Silence. Long silence. He stared at the table. Then he gave an answer I'd heard before, but never fully understood. "It's different." I frowned. "How?" He looked uncomfortable, like he knew he couldn't properly explain it. "It's just different for men and women." I remember feeling my chest tighten, because deep down I already knew where this conversation was going. "What do you mean it's different?" He hesitated, then eventually said what he'd been thinking, that men and women are judged differently, that society views them differently, that a woman loses value from certain mistakes while a man doesn't in the same way. Even now, remembering those words hurts, not because I believed them, but because the man I loved believed them, or at least part of him did. I remember looking at him and saying, "So your mistakes don't reduce your value?" His face immediately showed discomfort. He knew the contradiction. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't a hypocrite trying to justify his own actions. That's what made this so complicated. He genuinely couldn't explain it logically. It was more like an emotional belief he'd absorbed somewhere along the way. Something he felt, not something he could defend. I kept pushing, not aggressively, just desperately. Trying to understand, trying to save us. "Do you think less of me?" His eyes filled with tears immediately. "No." "Do you regret marrying me?" "No." "Do you love me more than anyone?" "Then why are we here?" And for the first time, I saw complete helplessness in his face. The kind of helplessness that comes when someone knows they're hurting the person they love, but doesn't know how to stop. I don't know. That answer broke me. Because I realized something. This wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't even really about my past. It was about whatever was happening inside his mind. A battle between logic and emotion. A battle that logic kept losing. Over the next month, divorce became a regular topic. Not because either of us wanted it, because my husband genuinely believed he might never fully overcome this. He started saying things that frightened me. Things like, what if this comes back every few years? What if I never get over it? What if I become resentful? What if we have children and then it destroys our family later? Those questions terrified him. And honestly, they terrified me too, because there was no way to answer them. Nobody knows the future. Nobody knows what battles they'll still be fighting in 10 years. One night we sat on the floor of our bedroom talking until almost sunrise. The room was dark except for a small lamp. Both of us looked exhausted, emotionally exhausted. He finally said something that made me feel physically sick. I think divorce might be kinder, that word haunted me, because he genuinely believed he was protecting me from years of uncertainty, protecting me from future resentment, protecting me from a husband who might never find peace. I started crying immediately, not elegant tears, not quiet tears, the kind where your entire body hurts, because all I could think was, how can losing the person you love be the kinder option? How? For hours we talked, cried, prayed, held each other, and somehow the conversation kept leading back to the same dead end. No solution, no plan, no direction, just fear. Then one day I reached a point where I couldn't stay silent anymore. I looked at him and said, will you at least speak to a psychologist? I wasn't asking him to commit to years of therapy. I wasn't asking him to do something extreme. Just a few sessions, a few conversations. An opportunity to explore why these thoughts had so much power over him. I genuinely thought he'd agree. At least consider it. Instead, he immediately shook his head. No. The speed of his answer shocked me. I thought maybe he misunderstood. I'm not saying you have to continue forever. No. Just try. No. Why? His answer stunned me. Because it won't work. I remember staring at him in disbelief. How could he know? He'd never spoken to a psychologist, never attended a session, never researched it, never learned what therapy actually involved. Nothing. Yet somehow he had already decided it was useless. I spent weeks trying to reason with him. Weeks. Explaining that he had nothing to lose. That even if it failed, at least we'd know we tried. That walking away from a marriage without exploring every option seemed unthinkable. But every conversation ended the same way. No. The words started feeling like a wall I couldn't climb. The thing that hurt wasn't even his skepticism. I understand people being skeptical. The thing that shattered me was his refusal to try. Because from my perspective, the choice seemed obvious. A few hours talking to a professional, or ending a marriage. A marriage built on love. A marriage built on sacrifice. A marriage built on years of loyalty. How is that not worth trying to save? Some nights after he fell asleep, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside me, wondering if one day I'd reach across the bed and his side would be empty forever, wondering if we'd become strangers, wondering if our future children would never exist, wondering how two people could love each other so much and still be standing on the edge of losing everything. The hardest part was that I couldn't hate him. I tried. For a few moments here and there, I tried. But every time I looked at him, I saw the same man I'd always loved, the same caring husband, the same gentle heart, the same person who would do anything for me except this one thing that might determine whether our marriage survives. Today, as I sit here telling this story, our future is still uncertain. We're still together. Still praying. Still talking. Still hoping. Some days I feel optimistic. Other days I'm terrified. But one thing I've learned through all of this is that love alone doesn't solve every problem. Sometimes two people can love each other deeply and still find themselves fighting battles neither of them understand. Right now we're standing at a crossroads, and I honestly don't know which path we're going to take. What I do know is this: if you're listening to this and you're married, don't underestimate the power of unresolved thoughts. Don't assume they'll disappear on their own. And don't wait until you're standing on the edge of losing everything before asking for help. As for me, I'm 23 years old, a revert Muslim, a wife, a woman who loves her husband with all her heart. And tonight, before I sleep, I'll probably make the same dua I've been making for months, that Allah softens both of our hearts, that He removes whatever darkness is causing this pain, and that years from now, this chapter will simply be a difficult memory in a long and beautiful marriage. Because despite everything that's happened, that's still the ending I'm praying for.